the last human on Earth, walked into the court of the creature who had outlived his entire species. The air in the gloomwood was not merely cold. It was a predatory chill that seeped through leather and wool to gnaw directly on the bone. It was a cold that knew it had already won. Ryleth felt it in the silence, a weight so profound it seemed to swallow the sound of his own footsteps. No birds called, no insects chirred. The trees stood as gnarled, black sentinels, their branches like claws raking at a sky the color of bruised flesh. This was the border, the absolute edge of the world that remembered life. Beyond lay only the desolation, a sea of ash and memory where his people had breathed their last. He was Ryleth, son of Kael, of the line of Andor. He was the last. The title was not a pride, but a curse, a weight he carried in every aching muscle, in every ragged breath. In his pack, lighter than a feather and heavier than a mountain, was the last hearth ember, sealed within a dwarven-forged locket of cold iron. It was the final, dying spark of the human world's heartfire. It was all he had left to offer. His destination was a place spoken of only in the oldest, most fearful legends. The Court of Umbral Blooms, the seat of the Dark Fae. And at its heart, she who ruled it, Morana, the queen of everything that could kill him. To the Fae, humanity had been a brief, noisy infestation, now thankfully scrubbed clean by the Great Withering. He was walking into the lion's den not as a challenger, but as a supplicant, a beggar with one final, desperate plea. For 3 days and nights, he navigated the gloomwood, the ember a dull, warm pulse against his chest, a constant reminder of his purpose. On the 4th morning, the forest changed. The oppressive gloom began to shimmer with a faint phosphorescent light. Pale, bioluminescent fungi clung to the tree trunks, and strange, silver-leafed vines coiled through the branches. The air lost its biting edge and became heavy with the scent of night-blooming flowers and damp earth. He had crossed over. He found himself in a clearing where the grass was a carpet of black velvet, studded with tiny flowers that glowed like captured sapphires. In the center stood a ring of ancient, smooth stones, and in the center of that ring, she was simply there, as if she had been formed from the shadows and starlight themselves. Morana. She was more and less than the stories described. There was no monstrous visage, no crown of skulls. Her beauty was a weapon in itself, so sharp and perfect it was painful to behold. Her skin was paler than moonlight, and her hair, a waterfall of liquid silver, seemed to drink the faint light of the glade. She wore a gown of what looked like woven twilight, deep amethyst and black, that drifted around her form as if moved by a wind he could not feel. Her eyes, the color of a starless midnight, held no warmth, no curiosity, only an ancient, bottomless calm. She was the stillness at the heart of the storm. Ryleth's hand went instinctively to the hilt of his knife, a useless gesture he aborted halfway. "You do not threaten a hurricane. An ember has wandered into my garden." Her voice was like the chime of ice crystals, melodic and utterly devoid of life. "How quaint. Do you mean to warm yourself, little spark? There is no warmth here for your kind." He forced his spine straight, meeting that terrifyingly empty gaze. "I am Ryleth, the last of humanity." A flicker of something, not interest but perhaps the ghost of recognition, crossed her features. "The last?" I had heard the chattering was over. "I suppose one final echo remains." She tilted her head, a gesture a bird of prey might make before the strike. "Why have you come to die in a more interesting fashion than simply fading away?" He unclenched his jaw, his voice rough from disuse and strain. "I have not come to die. I have come to bargain." Her laughter was a soft, dangerous sound, like shattering glass. "Bargain? You have nothing I desire. Your world is dust. Your people a memory. You carry the stink of mortality on you, Ryleth the Last. It is a currency I do not trade in." "This," he said, his voice gaining strength as he pulled the locket from beneath his tunic. The cold iron was a stark contrast to the living magic of the glade. He opened the clasp. A soft, golden-orange light pulsed from within, a tiny, defiant heartbeat. "The last hearth ember of my people. The final spark of the world fire you watched die." For the first time, her stillness broke. She did not move, but the air around her tightened. The glowing flowers in the grass dimmed slightly. Her midnight eyes were now fixed on the ember, and in their depths, he saw not desire, but a profound and terrible recognition. The heart fire, she whispered. The words were not for him. I watched it be lit at the dawn of things. I felt it go out. Her gaze lifted back to him, sharp and analytical. You carry a ghost. A significant one, but a ghost nonetheless. What could you possibly believe I would give for a memory? Life, Ryleth said, the word torn from the very core of him. Use your power. Use the magic that sustains this eternal, unchanging court. Take this ember and from it, rekindle the world. Bring my people back. Morana stared at him for a long, silent moment, and he felt the full, crushing weight of her millennia of existence. He was a mayfly asking a mountain to move. Impossible, she stated flatly. The song of humanity is finished. To sing it again would be discordant, a violation of the great melody. Why would I do this? Because you are a queen of life as much as death. Ryleth's control finally snapped, his voice echoing in the silent glade. You preside over everything that grows, that hunts, that is. You are the heart of this wild, living world, and a part of it has been amputated. You feel the lack of it, this silence where there was once noise. I can see it in your eyes. Restore it. Not for me, for the balance of your own domain. He had struck a nerve. A subtle tension tightened the skin around her eyes. She drifted closer, her bare feet floating a hair's breadth above the black grass. The air grew so cold his breath plumed before him. You are eloquent for a dying creature, she said, her voice now a whisper that coiled around him. You speak of balance. Very well. Let us talk of bargains. The power to reignite a dead race is not pulled from the air. It requires the sacrifice of equal measure. A life for a life, but on a scale you cannot comprehend. She stopped an arm's length away. He could see the impossible detail of her gown, the way the obsidian thorns in her hair seemed to drink the light. I will entertain your proposal, Ryleth the Last. I will take your ember, I will attempt this, rekindling. But the price is you. My life? He asked, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He had been prepared for this. Her lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. Death is a simple transaction, and I have a surplus. No. Your life, as you know it, is the price. You will stay, here, in my court. You will be my guest, a living reminder of the bargain struck. You will serve at my pleasure for as long as I deem it, your freedom for the ghost of a chance that your people will walk the world again. The terms were a different kind of death, an eternity in this beautiful, terrible place, at the mercy of a creature who saw him as an interesting artifact. How do I know you'll even try? He ground out. You don't, she said simply. You have only my word, and the alternative is to walk back into the desolation and let the last light in you fade to nothing, alone. The choice is yours, little spark. Freedom and certain extinction, or a gilded cage and a sliver of hope? Ryleth looked from her impassive face to the pulsing ember in his palm. The last warmth of 1,000,000 hearths, of all the mothers, fathers, lovers, and children who were now dust. He saw their faces in its light. He could not let it be the end. He closed his fingers around the locket, then, with a slow, deliberate motion, held it out to her. The bargain is struck, he said, his voice hollow. Morana's pale fingers closed over the locket, her skin never touching his. The moment she took it, the ember's light flared, then settled, now cradled in her power. It is, she replied. She turned, her gown swirling like mist. Come, my guest. Your cage awaits. As he took his first step into the heart of her realm, Ryleth knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had just made a deal with the most dangerous being in existence, and the true cost had only just begun. His cage was not made of iron bars, but of impossible beauty and profound alienation. Morana led him from the clearing not by a path, but through the landscape itself, which seemed to warp and curl to accommodate her passage. One moment they were in the glowing glade, the next they were walking through a corridor of weeping willows whose leaves were shards of polished silver, tinkling softly in a non-existent breeze. The air was thick with the perfume of flowers that had no name in any human tongue, a scent that was intoxicating and vaguely narcotic. They arrived at a structure that defied mortal architecture. It was the Court of Umbral Blooms, a palace grown from the living forest itself. Towers were not built, but were colossal, spiraling trees, their bark like polished jet, with windows of solidified moonlight. Bridges of woven, flowering vines spanned chasms where rivers of liquid starlight flowed silently. Fae courtiers, beings of breathtaking and terrifying forms paused in their silent movements to watch him pass. Their eyes held no hostility, only a deep, unnerving curiosity, the way one might look at a rare insect. He was an exhibit, the last human. Morana stopped before a dwelling nestled in the roots of a great, dark tree. It was a pavilion of living wood and clear crystalline panels that offered a panoramic and inescapable view of the court. "These are your quarters," she said, her voice still that same melodic chime. "You may go where you wish within the court's bounds. The forest beyond, however, will not be so accommodating. It has a will of its own, and it does not suffer mortal feet gladly." "My purpose?" Ryleth asked, his voice rough against the pervasive, elegant silence. "You said I would serve." "You are serving," she replied, a corner of her mouth tilting in what could not be called a smile. "By being a living lesson, a reminder of transience. For now, that is enough." She gestured to the pavilion. "You will find sustenance within. It will sustain your body, if not your spirit." With that, she was gone, not walking away, but simply dissolving into a swirl of shadow and amethyst mist that was caught and pulled apart by the wind. The interior of the pavilion was sparse and beautiful. There was a bed of soft gray moss, a chair of gnarled, comfortable-looking wood, and a table. On the table sat a crystal carafe filled with clear liquid, and a single, perfect fruit that pulsed with a soft internal light. It was food, but it felt like a test. Days bled into a week, then 2. Ryleth's existence became a strange, silent routine. He explored the court, always feeling the weight of countless eyes upon him. The Fae never spoke to him, though they would sometimes stop and stare, their expressions unreadable. He saw wonders that would have been the subject of epic poems in his world. A grove where the trees grew gems instead of fruit. A hall where shadows danced to music only they could hear. A pool that showed not one's reflection, but glimpses of distant, star-strewn realms. He also saw the dangers. He watched a beautiful butterfly-winged fae lure a lesser spirit into a patch of flowers that snapped shut like mouths, swallowing it whole. He saw thorns on a rosebush drip with a venom that smoked where it hit the ground. This was Morana's domain, beauty and death, inextricably linked. He saw her only at a distance, presiding over her court from a throne of intertwined roots and obsidian. She was always still, always watching, a statue of perfect, untouchable power. He began to understand the sheer cosmic scale of her existence. His lifetime was a blink to her. His people's entire history, a short chapter in a book she had closed long ago. The hope that had driven him here began to feel foolish, a child's wish thrown at a mountain. His frustration grew, a hot, coiling snake in his gut. He was not a patient man. Survival had demanded action, not passive waiting. He needed to know if she was even trying. He needed to do something. His chance came one evening as he wandered near the throne tree. He saw her, not on her throne, but standing alone by the river of starlight, her back to him. It was the most isolated he had ever seen her. The impulse, born of weeks of pent-up desperation, took hold. He approached, his boots silent on the velvety grass. "Your Majesty," she did not turn. "The spark stirs. I was wondering how long your patience would last." "You have the ember. What progress have you made?" he demanded, the formality crumbling. Now she turned, her expression one of mild, academic interest. "Progress? This is not one of your mortal smithies, where metal is beaten into shape between one sunrise and the next. I am attempting to reverse the entropy of an entire race. I am studying the song within the ember, learning its notes. It is complex. It's been weeks, and I have existed for millennia," she replied, her tone utterly flat. "Your haste is as meaningless as your lifespan. You offered a bargain. I accepted. You do not get to dictate the tempo." The condescension in her voice was like a spark on tinder. "This isn't a scholarly exercise. These were people. With lives, with loves. They deserve more than to be your fascinating project." Her eyes narrowed, the first real emotion he had seen in them. Annoyance. "Deserve? What does deserve have to do with the turning of the world? Your people lived. They burned brightly, and they were extinguished. That is the nature of mortal things. That you cling so desperately to their memory is what makes you so peculiarly human. and so very, very loud. Loud? He took a step closer, his hands clenched into fists. You sit here in your silent, perfect, unchanging court and you call us loud? At least we lived. We felt joy and grief and passion. What do you feel, Morana? What besides the cold satisfaction of outlasting everything else? The air around them froze, literally. A rime of frost crackled over the grass at her feet, and the river of starlight slowed its flow. Her face was a mask of icy fury. You will not, she said, each word dropping like a shard of ice. Speak to me of feeling. You who will be dust and a story in a heartbeat. You know nothing of my burdens, of the weight of eternity, of holding the balance between life and death for all things in this realm. Your passions are a firecracker. Mine are the glacier that carves mountains. Do not mistake my forbearance for weakness, little human. You are here on my sufferance. Remember your place. It was a dismissal, absolute and final. The power radiating from her was a physical pressure, forcing him back a step. He had overplayed his hand, let his anger shatter the fragile truce. He saw it then, not just a queen but a force of nature, and he had just thrown himself against the rocks. He said nothing, merely giving a stiff, jerky nod before turning and walking away, the chill of her wrath clinging to him like a shroud. He had sought to provoke action, and all he had provoked was the knowledge of his own profound insignificance. Back in his crystalline pavilion, he stared out at the impossibly beautiful, heartless court. He was a prisoner, not just of this place but of her whims, and he had just made his captor angry. The frost of Morana's displeasure lingered for days. The Fae courtiers, who had previously regarded Ryleth with detached curiosity, now gave him a wide berth, their glances holding a new, sharp edge of warning. The very air in his pavilion felt colder. The sustenance that appeared on his table each day seemed plainer, and the intoxicating perfumes of the court now carried a bitter, metallic undertone. He was being punished, not with chains but with atmosphere. He had been put in his place, and the entire realm was enforcing it. Ryleth responded not with further defiance, but with a grim, watchful silence. He had been a hunter, long before he was the last. A hunter knew when to charge, and when to be still, to observe, to learn the patterns of his prey. Morana was not prey, of course. She was the apex predator, but the principle held. He had learned that direct confrontation was a fool's game. He needed to understand her, this court, the rules of this world he was trapped in. He began to walk the court again, but this time with a different purpose. He noted which paths the Fae favored, which groves they avoided. He watched how they interacted with each other, not with words, which were rare, but with subtle shifts in posture, with the flicker of a glance, with the offering of a glowing flower or a sharp obsidian thorn. It was a language of implication and subtle threat, a dance he was only beginning to decipher. He also watched her, from a distance always. He saw her hold court, her judgment swift, strange, and absolute. A sprite who had stolen the light from a star moth was condemned to carry a dim glow within its own chest for a century. A wood wight that had allowed a sacred tree to sallow was ordered to sing to it each night until it bloomed again. Her justice was not about good or evil, but about balance, about the maintenance of her perfect, eternal order. It was terrifyingly alien, yet he could not call it capricious. There was a brutal, ancient logic to it. One afternoon, drawn by a sound he had not heard before, a low, resonant humming, he found a secluded grove he had not yet discovered. In its center stood a single magnificent tree, its bark the color of weathered silver, its leaves a shimmering, liquid gold. The humming seemed to emanate from the tree itself. At its base, sitting with her back against the trunk and her eyes closed, was Morana. She was alone, and the mask of the untouchable queen was gone. In its place was an expression of, not peace, but a profound and weary concentration. One pale hand was pressed flat against the silver bark, and as he watched, hidden by the foliage at the grove's edge, he saw a faint, golden light pulse from her palm into the tree, matching the rhythm of the hum. She was feeding it, sustaining it. This was not the act of a distant, heartless monarch. This was the work of a caretaker, a gardener tending to the most precious of her charges. He held his breath, the image so at odds with the creature who had frozen the very air with her anger. He was witnessing something private, something sacred, He knew with a hunter's instinct that to be discovered would be a transgression far greater than his angry words by the river. He retreated as silently as he had come. The image of her, powerful yet weary, eternal yet nurturing, burned into his mind. It complicated her. She was no longer just the queen of everything that could kill him. She was also the queen who sustained the golden tree. This revelation shifted something inside him. The coiling snake of his frustration began to uncoil, replaced by a simmering, reluctant curiosity. He started to notice other small things. The way the light in the court dimmed slightly when she was deep in thought on her throne. The way a wilting flower would perk up almost imperceptibly as she passed by. Her power wasn't just for show or for punishment. It was the very lifeblood of this realm, constantly expended, constantly flowing. A few days later, his observations led him to another discovery. In a forgotten corner of the court, overgrown with those same glowing sapphire flowers from their first meeting, he found a statue. It was worn smooth by time, but the form was unmistakably human. A woman, her stone hand outstretched as if in offering, a look of wonder, not fear, on her eroded face. At her feet, nestled amongst the roots, was a small rusted locket, its chain long since broken. His breath caught. He was not the first human to have walked here. The stories spoke only of fear and conflict, but this statue told a different story, one of contact, of something else. He did not touch it, feeling as if he were standing on hallowed ground. Who was she? What had her bargain been? That evening, he did not wait for his sustenance to appear in his pavilion. He ventured to the heart of the court, to the base of her throne tree. Morana was there, seated on her obsidian and root throne, her gaze distant. She did not look at him as he approached. "You are persistent," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier ice but still cool. "I have questions," Ryleth said, his tone careful, neutral. "Mortal beings always do. It is your defining trait." He ignored the barb. "I found a statue. In the western grove, a human woman." Morana went very still, her distant gaze focused, sharpening on him. The air didn't freeze, but it grew heavy, waiting. "That is a place you should not go." "Why?" "Who was she?" A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft chime of the silver leaves in the distance. For a moment, he thought she would not answer, that she would simply dismiss him again. "Her name was Ilara," Morana said finally, the name sounding ancient and strange on her lips. "That was a long time ago, before the withering, before your kind learned to fear the dark places." "What was she to you?" "A mistake," Morana replied, but the word lacked venom. It was spoken with a weight of genuine regret. She was a scholar, an explorer. She found her way here, much as you did, though with less desperation. She was curious. We spoke. She reminded me that not all mortal things were noise. Some were music. Ryleth watched her, seeing the ghost of that memory in the slight tightening around her eyes. "What happened to her?" "Time happened," Morana said, her voice soft. "She grew old. I offered her the choice you so disdain, to become Fae, to stay. She refused. She said her mortality was what gave her music its beauty. She returned to her world, and I had the statue made so I would not forget the lesson." "What lesson?" "That some fires are meant to burn out," she said, her dark eyes finally meeting his. "To hold them too long is to extinguish their essence. Your hearth ember, it is the same. To simply rekindle the same fire may be to miss the point entirely." It was the first time she had spoken to him not as a specimen or an irritant, but as someone capable of understanding a complex truth. It was the first real thing she had shared with him. "So you are trying," he said, not as an accusation, but as a realization. "I am considering the problem," she corrected, though it lacked her usual sharpness. "The ember holds the song of your people. To sing it again requires more than just power. It requires the right key, the right reason." She looked away, back towards the distant, unseen grove where the golden tree hummed. Ilara's song was beautiful because it was finite. Your people's song was a chorus. To bring it back as an echo would be an insult to its memory. Ryleth stood there, the silence now a companion rather than a wall. The desperate, grieving man who had stormed into her glade was receding, replaced by a man beginning to grasp the profound, heartbreaking scale of the problem. He had asked for a miracle, and she was telling him that miracles had conditions, and that some memories were too sacred to be cheaply resurrected. He had come demanding progress. He left with something more valuable, a fragment of understanding. The cage was still a cage, but he was no longer just rattling the bars. He was starting to study the lock. The fragile truce born in the shadow of the throne tree did not blossom into friendship, but it carved out a space for a new, cautious dynamic. The court's atmosphere thawed accordingly. The food on Ryleth's table regained its subtle, magical flavor, and the Fae courtiers no longer actively shunned him. He was still an outsider, a spectacle, but now one that had earned a sliver of the Queen's measured tolerance. He began to seek her out, not with demands, but with questions. He asked about the nature of the River of Starlight, and she explained it was the collected memory of dead stars flowing to water the roots of the world. He inquired about the shadow dancers in the Great Hall, and she described them as concepts of joy and sorrow given form. In turn, he found himself speaking of his own world, not the grand tragedies, but the small, vivid details. The smell of rain on hot stone, the weight of a child's trust, the way a shared meal could feel like a fortress against the dark. He never mentioned the withering, and she never asked. It was an unspoken agreement to build a bridge over that chasm. One evening, he found her in the grove of the golden tree. She was not tending to it, but simply standing before it, her silver hair almost blending with the tree's metallic bark. "It is the heartwood of this realm," she said without turning, sensing his presence. "The first tree, its roots bind our world together. Its song is the foundation of all other songs." "Including humanity's?" Ryleth asked, coming to stand beside her. The humming was a physical vibration in the air, a deep, resonant note that felt older than time. "Especially humanity's," she replied. "All mortal races were born from a single, divergent note in its song. Your fire, the dwarves' stone, the merfolk's waves, all echoes of this one source." He watched the golden leaves shimmer. "It's beautiful. It is dying." The words were spoken so softly he almost missed them. He turned to look at her. Her profile was etched with a sorrow so profound, it seemed to dim the very light around them. "Dying? How can that be? You were feeding it your power." "A temporary measure," she said, her gaze fixed on the tree. "The withering that took your world was not an isolated event. It was a symptom, a crack in the great melody. The heartwood is the source, and it is fading. My power can sustain it, but not forever. Not without..." She trailed off, a rare moment of uncertainty. Without what? Ryleth's mind was reeling. The entire foundation of this eternal court was crumbling, and she had said nothing. "Without a new song," she whispered. "A powerful, resonant note to reinvigorate the old ones. A spark to rekindle a different fire." Her dark eyes finally slid to his, and in them, he saw the terrible truth. "Your hearth ember was never just about your people, Ryleth. It was a possibility, a potential key, but it is a song of an ending. I need a song of a beginning." The pieces clicked into place with a devastating clarity. Her initial reluctance, her cryptic statements about the right reason, her study of the ember. She wasn't just trying to fulfill his bargain. She was trying to save her entire world, and she had hoped the last spark of humanity might hold the secret. The weight of her solitude, the burden of her eternity, suddenly felt tangible. He was not a prisoner in a gilded cage. He was a potential component in a last, desperate ritual to stave off the end of everything. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice rough. "What would you have done? Would you have trusted me? Or would you have seen it as a betrayal of our bargain?" She gave a faint, sad smile. "You would have seen your people's last hope being used as fertilizer for my tree." He wanted to deny it, but he knew she was right. The man he had been would have raged, would have seen it as the ultimate deception. Now he saw the horrifying symmetry. He had come to her to save a dead world, only to find she was fighting to save a dying one. "Is there a way?" he asked. "A song of a beginning?" "I do not know," she admitted, the confession seeming to cost her. "I have searched for millennia. I have listened to the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. All songs are beautiful, but none have been right. The heartwood is particular. It requires a song born of sacrifice, of choice, of love for the world itself, not just a desire to possess it. Her eyes held his. A song like that is rarer than a dying star. He looked from her weary, beautiful face to the majestic, fading tree. The last human and the queen of a dying world. They were not so different. Both were guardians of a final, fading light. Without thinking, driven by an impulse he didn't understand, he reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cool and smooth in his, and for a moment, she went perfectly rigid, her eyes widening in shock. No one, he realized, had likely touched her without fear or reverence in thousands of years. It was an intimacy far greater than any kiss. He didn't speak. He simply held her hand, standing with her before the dying heartwood, sharing the weight of its silence. After a long moment, he felt the faintest pressure in return, her fingers curling slightly around his. It was not an embrace, not a declaration. It was an acknowledgement, a shared burden, a spark of something new in the gathering dark. The humming of the tree seemed to deepen for a single, perfect moment, resonating through the soles of his feet and the palm holding hers, before settling back into its weary rhythm. The touch changed everything. It was a line crossed, a barrier dissolved not by words, but by a shared, silent understanding of desolation. In the days that followed, the space between them was charged with a new, unspoken tension. It wasn't the hostile friction of their first encounters, nor the cautious intellectual curiosity of their later discussions. This was a gravitational pull, a quiet, terrifying awareness that they were the only two souls in the universe who truly comprehended the scale of the impending silence. Morana no longer held court from the distant remove of her obsidian throne. She would often be found walking the paths of her realm, and Ryleth would fall into step beside her. They spoke of practicalities, of the slow, insidious signs of the heartwood's decay, a leaf turning brown at the edge here, a branch losing its hum there. He offered his perspective, not as a mage, but as a man who had watched his own world die. He spoke of the interconnectedness of things, how the failure of a single crop could unravel an entire civilization. She listened, truly listened, her sharp, ancient mind considering his mortal logic as a valid data point in her eternal equation. He, in turn, learned the intricate poetry of her power. She showed him how to listen to the health of a glade, to feel the flow of magic in the air like a current. He couldn't manipulate it, but he could sense its ebb and flow, its dissonances and harmonies. He began to understand the court, not as a static painting, but as a living, breathing symphony that she conducted with every breath, a symphony that was slowly falling out of tune. One afternoon, in a library whose shelves were living crystal and whose books were captured light, he found her staring at the hearth ember, now resting on a pedestal of woven roots. It pulsed softly, its warm, golden light a stark contrast to the cool blue hues of the library. "It is not the right key," she said. Her voice, laced with a frustration he now recognized, was directed inward. "The song is one of community, of hearth and home. It is beautiful, but it is a closed circle. The heartwood needs a song that reaches out, that connects and nourishes other melodies, not one that turns inward for warmth." Ryleth stood beside her, watching the light of his people's soul beat against the roots that held it. There was no anger in him anymore, only a profound, aching sadness. "So it's useless." "No," she said, turning to him. "Not useless. It taught me what I am not looking for, and it brought me you." Her words hung in the air, simple and devastating. "It brought me you." He looked at her, truly looked at her. The queen of everything that could kill him was staring at the last human not as a tool, not as a specimen, but as a person. A partner in this futile, glorious last stand. "There has to be another way," he insisted, the hunter in him refusing to accept defeat. "If not the ember, then something else. You said it yourself. A song of sacrifice, of choice." "Such songs are not composed," she replied, her dark eyes holding his. "They are lived. They are the sum of a life's choices, given freely at the moment of culmination. I have witnessed a handful in all my existence. A mother giving her life for her child, a warrior laying down his arms to save his enemy, a star choosing to go supernova to seed the void with the elements of life." She gestured around them. "This entire court, its millennia of beauty, is built on a foundation of such songs collected over eons. But the reservoir is running dry. An idea, wild and terrifying, began to form in the back of Ryleth's mind. It was a shadow, a half-thought, but it took root. He pushed it away. It was too abstract, too desperate. Their search became more frantic. They traveled to the edges of her realm, to places where the fabric of reality grew thin, and the stars could be seen in the daylight. They consulted with ancient, slumbering earth spirits and flighty, dangerous wind elementals. The answers were always the same. The silence was coming. The great melody was ending. The strain began to show on Morana. The faint inner light of her skin dimmed. The effortless grace with which she moved became slightly labored. She was pouring more and more of her own essence into the heartwood, a stopgap measure that was bleeding her dry. Ryleth watched her with a growing, gnawing fear that had nothing to do with his own survival. The thought of this world, of her, fading into nothing, was becoming unbearable. The crisis came on a night when no stars shone through the crystalline ceiling of the court. The humming of the heartwood faltered, stuttered, and fell silent for 3 long, heart-stopping seconds. A wave of palpable wrongness swept through the realm. Flowers wilted. The river of starlight slowed to a crawl. The Fae courtiers froze in place, their forms flickering with panic. Morana gasped, a hand flying to her chest as if she'd been struck. She vanished from his side and reappeared at the base of the silver tree, her hands pressed against it, her entire body rigid as she poured her power into it. The humming returned, weak and thready, but it returned. Ryleth ran to her, arriving as she slumped to her knees, her breathing ragged. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering, unsure. "I cannot hold it," she whispered, the words filled with a terror he had never imagined she could feel. "The roots are crumbling. The song is forgetting itself." He looked at her, at the queen brought to her knees, not by an enemy, but by entropy itself. He looked at the fading tree, the symbol of all life. He thought of his people, their song already ended. He thought of the hearth ember, a beautiful closed circle, and he knew. The wild, terrifying idea crystallized into absolute certain purpose. He reached out and cupped her cheek, forcing her to look at him. Her skin was cold. "You said you needed a new song," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. A song of sacrifice and choice. A song of a beginning. Her eyes, wide with exhaustion and fear, searched his. "Ryleth, my life is a song that is already over," he said, the truth of it settling peacefully within him. "But my choice can be a new one." He understood now. The hearth ember was the end of his people's song, but he could be the beginning of a new one. His sacrifice would not be for a memory, but for a future. For her, for this world. It was a choice born not of desperation, but of love for the beauty he had found in the shadow of the end. He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet with him. He didn't know how to do it, only that he would. He turned from the terrified queen and faced the dying heartwood, the last human ready to sing a note that had never been heard before. The silence that had fallen after the heartwood stutter was not an absence of sound, but a presence. A heavy, waiting void. Ryleth's words, "My choice can be a new one," seemed to hang in that void, the only solid thing in a universe of fading magic. Morana stared at him, her exhaustion momentarily eclipsed by a dawning, horrified comprehension. "No," she breathed, the word a fragile shard of ice. "Ryleth, you do not understand what you are proposing. It is not a simple death, it is an unmaking, a scattering of your essence into the root song. There is no promise it will work. You would be annihilated for a possibility." He turned from the tree to face her fully, his expression serene, a stark contrast to the storm in her eyes. For the first time since he had stumbled into her glade, he felt no fear, no desperation, only a profound and absolute certainty. "I understand more than you think," he said, his voice low and steady. "I've watched my world end. I know the taste of annihilation. This is different. This is a choice. You said it yourself. The song must be born of sacrifice and love for the world itself." He took a step toward her, his gaze unwavering. "I don't just love this world, Morana. I love the queen who sustains it." The confession was not a grand declaration, but a simple, devastating statement of fact. It landed not as a romantic flourish, but as the final, logical component of the bargain they had struck so long ago. He had offered his freedom for a sliver of hope. Now he was offering his very song for the hope of her. Her regal composure shattered. A tremor ran through her and she shook her head, a frantic human gesture. I cannot accept this. I will not be the reason for your end. I have outlived countless souls. I will not add yours to that pyre. You won't be, he said gently, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but stood so close he could feel the faint, cool energy radiating from her skin. You gave me a purpose when I had none. You showed me that eternity isn't a curse, but a duty. And you showed me that even the most ancient, powerful beings can feel loneliness. Let me do this, not as your prisoner or your supplicant, but as a man who has found something worth saving. He could see the war within her, the millennia-old instinct to preserve, to observe, to remain untouched, battling against a new, terrifying, and overwhelming need to protect him. It was the final, irrevocable proof that he had reached her. The queen of everything that could kill him did not want his death. How? She whispered, her voice breaking. It was a surrender. I don't know the magic, he admitted, but I know the intent. You are the conductor. Use me. Use my choice as your key. He turned back to the heartwood, its golden light now guttering like a candle in the wind. He placed a hand on its silvery bark. It was warm, and he could feel the vast, weary consciousness within, a great mind forgetting its own thoughts. He closed his eyes. He didn't think of the desolation or the lost billions. He thought of the small, stolen moments that had led him here, the startling beauty of the glowing glade, the sharp thrill of their arguments, the quiet understanding in the library, the weight of her hand in his. He poured every memory, every sensation into the touch. He offered not his grief, but his gratitude, not his past, but the future he was choosing for her. He felt Morana step up behind him. Her hands, cool and trembling slightly, came to rest on his shoulders. He could feel her power gathering, not the explosive, freezing wrath of before, but a focused, desperate, and loving concentration. The song is not in the blood or the bone, she murmured, her voice resonating through him, becoming a part of the ritual. It is in the choice, the love that seeks no dominion, the sacrifice that asks for no reward. Let this be the note, the first note. Her power flowed into him, but it did not tear him apart. It wove through his being, a loom of starlight and shadow, drawing out the brilliant, golden thread of his intention. It was excruciating and ecstatic, a feeling of being utterly known and completely unmade. He was not being destroyed. He was being translated. A sound began, not from his throat, but from the core of his soul. It was a single, clear, resonant note that held within it the crackle of a hearth fire, the resilience of the human spirit, and the selfless love of one man for a queen and her world. It was a note that had never existed before. The note touched the heartwood. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then a shiver ran through the great tree, from its deepest roots to its highest leaf. The brown curling edges of the leaves flushed with gold. The faltering hum surged, not back to its old rhythm, but into a new, more complex and powerful melody. The light that burst forth was not just golden, but shot through with the warm orange glow of a hearth and the steady silver light of the moon. The wave of life exploded outwards. The wilted flowers in the grove straightened, their colors deepening. The river of starlight flowed faster, singing as it moved. Throughout the court, Fae who had been flickering solidified, their forms brighter, their movements filled with renewed vitality. The great silence had been broken. Ryleth felt his physical form beginning to dissolve, not into nothingness, but into the music. He was becoming part of the song, woven into the very fabric of the realm. He turned his head, and through the blinding, beautiful light, he saw Morana's face. The fear was gone. The weariness was gone. In its place was an awe so profound it was itself a kind of power. And love, a love as vast and eternal as she was. He smiled at her, a final peaceful gift, as his form faded into the radiant symphony of the reborn heartwood. The last human was gone, but the first note of a new world had been sung. The new song of the heartwood did not simply restore the court of umbral blooms. It transformed it. The light was warmer, the colors deeper, the very air thrumming with a vitality it had not known for eons. The realm was no longer a perfect, static beauty, but a dynamic, growing one. It held within its melody the memory of fire, the resilience of humanity, the warmth of a shared hearth. It was a hybrid symphony, and at its core was the enduring, silver and gold power of its queen. Morana stood for a long time, her hands still tingling with the echo of his shoulders, her eyes fixed on the space where Ryleth had been. The grief was a sharp physical pain, a hollowed-out space in her immortal chest, but it was not the cold, empty grief of outliving another mortal. This was different. He had not been taken from her. He had given himself to her, and in doing so, had become a part of everything she was, everything she ruled. He was in the warm light on the silver bark. He was in the resilient new growth on the trees. He was in the deeper, more complex hum of the world's heart. He was gone, and yet he was more present than he had ever been. Days turned into weeks. The Fae Court, revitalized, celebrated their salvation, but Morana moved through the festivities like a ghost. The hollow ache, a constant companion. She would find herself in the library, expecting to see him studying a book of light. She would walk the path to the human statue, feeling his absence like a fresh wound. The bargain was fulfilled. Humanity was saved, not by a resurrection of the old, but by the creation of a new, vibrant world, one that now carried their essence within its very soul. But the cost felt unbearable. It was in the grove of the heartwood, as she often was, that she felt it. A pull, a resonance that was distinctly, unmistakably him. It wasn't a memory. It was a presence, focused and intent, calling to her from deep within the tree, following an impulse she did not understand. She placed both hands upon the trunk and poured her consciousness into the root song, into the vast, golden network of power that now thrummed with Ryleth's sacrifice. And she found him. Not as a scattered essence, not as a fading echo, but as a coalesced consciousness. A brilliant, steady flame burning at the very center of the world's heart. He had not been annihilated. His love, his choice, had been so pure, so perfectly in tune with the heartwood's need, that it had preserved him. He was the guardian of the new song, the steward of the spark he had ignited. Morana. His voice was not a sound, but a feeling that bloomed in her mind, warm and familiar and full of wonder. Tears, something she had not shed in millennia, streamed down her face, glittering like diamonds in the tree's light. "You are here." "I am," his thought voice replied, suffused with a peace that soothed her aching soul. "I am the song, and the song is me. I see it all, Morana, the new life blooming at the edge of the gloomwood. The first human children, born from the world's renewed dream, playing in meadows that were dust." He showed her, visions flowing into her mind, a world healing, the desolation giving way to green, new souls awakening, carrying the best of the old humanity within them, but free of its sorrows. It was the happy ending he had wanted, but one he was not merely watching from afar. He was its source, but I am also anchored. His thought voice continued, and she felt a focused intent, a desire. The song needs a conductor. The world needs its queen, and I need you. A understanding passed between them, as clear as the crystalline panels of his old pavilion. The power was there, the love that had defied entropy was there. The question was not if, but what form it would take. She knew what she had to do. It was her turn to make a choice, her turn to sing a new note. She drew upon the boundless, renewed power of the heartwood, upon the love that now beat in its rhythm. She did not try to pull him out, for that would be to undo his sacrifice. Instead, she began to weave. She wove the light of the tree, the memory of his human form, the strength of his spirit, and the entirety of her own eternal love into a new shape, a vessel worthy of the king he had become. Golden light swirled before her, pulling itself from the bark of the tree, from the air, from the very song itself. It solidified, sculpted by her will and their shared intent. And then he was there, standing before her, real and solid. He looked like Ryleth, but more. His lean, wiry build remained, but the scars of his old life were gone, replaced by a faint golden tracery of light that pulsed softly under his skin, mirroring the tree's veins. His dark hair now held subtle streaks of silver gold, and his eyes, when they opened, were no longer merely human. They held the warm brown of rich earth, but deep within them swirled the light of the newborn stars outside. He was clothed in simple, elegant robes of deep green and silver, the colors of the reborn court. He took a breath, a real shuddering breath, and looked at his hands. Then at her. "Morana," he said aloud, his voice the same, yet layered with the deep, resonant hum of the world. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed his cheek. It was warm, solid, real. The hollow ache in her chest filled with a radiant, soaring joy so powerful it stole her breath. "You are," she began, but words failed her. "I am what we made together," Ryleth said, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. The gesture was human, intimate, but the power that flowed from him was pure fae, a king meeting his queen. "The heartwood is my body, this realm is my blood, and its song is my soul. But my heart has always been yours." He drew her into his arms, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear of the future. His kiss was not the desperate clash of mortality, but the slow, deep, eternal claiming of two forces that had found their perfect balance. It tasted of starlight and hearth smoke, of silver leaves and golden dawns. It was a promise, a coronation, and a beginning, all in one. When they parted, foreheads resting together, the court of umbral blooms was silent, not in waiting, but in reverence. The Fae, from the lowest sprite to the highest noble, had gathered at the edge of the grove, witnessing the birth of their new king. Ryleth, the last human, was gone. In his place stood Ryleth, the first Fae king, his hand in Morana's, his love woven into the song of a world they would rule together, forever.